The Chamber of Convergence hummed with the accumulated power of 11 species, their representatives seated in a crescent of bioluminescent pedestals that floated above the obsidian floor of the station called Threshold. At the chamber's center, suspended within a sphere of crystalline force, hung the projection of Earth, a pale blue marble wrapped in wisps of white, utterly insignificant against the velvet darkness of space. Counselor Veth of the Kalori Syndicate leaned forward, his forearms folding across his thorax in a gesture of dismissiveness that the Kalori had perfected across 6,000 years of dominion. His compound eyes, each facet reflecting the tiny image of Earth, gleamed with something between amusement and disgust. 1,200 years, he said, his voice resonating through the translation matrices. 1,200 years since the Ascendancy first made contact with this species. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the assembled council. The humans had been discovered by the hegemonic survey fleet in the year 2347 of their crude calendar. A primitive pre-interstellar civilization on a backwater world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in an unfashionable arm of the galaxy. They had been observed, studied, and ultimately deemed unworthy of integration. Not because they were dangerous. No one believed humans were dangerous. Because they were beneath notice. Their neurological architecture reveals no capacity for unified consciousness, continued Veth, pulling up biological schematics that made the rounds of the council with the bored regularity of a recurring memo. They possess no telepathic binding. Their communication relies on primitive vibrational waves through atmosphere, a system so inefficient it borders on comedy. Their lifespan is a mere 80 cycles. Their technology, even now, remains confined to their single system. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. They are, by every metric we possess, the most unremarkable species the Ascendancy has ever catalogued. Counselor H of the Tessari Collective tilted her elongated head, a graceful gesture that conveyed polite skepticism. The survey reports indicated they had potential. Some of our scholars believed. Believed what? Veth's wings fluttered with derision. That the humans would ascend on their own? That their crude fission and chemical propulsion systems represented the seeds of something greater? He made a sound that translated, roughly, as a laugh. They have had 3 centuries since first contact. 3 centuries to demonstrate some spark of worthiness. And what have they shown us? He gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show images that cycled through the chamber. Human cities with their primitive electrical lights. Human aircraft, clumsy metal birds that barely cleared their atmosphere. Human weapons that relied on the violent expansion of reactive gases. War, Veth said. They war amongst themselves with the same crude weapons they use to hunt animals on their world. They pollute their own atmosphere. They destroy their own ecosystems. They starve each other while claiming to value compassion. His compound eyes narrowed. They are a species of contradictions, too aggressive to be peaceful, too weak to be warriors. Too social to be solitary, too fractured to be unified. They are, in every meaningful sense, nothing. The council murmured its agreement. The Tessari representative said nothing more. And yet, Veth continued, his voice taking on the lilting cadence of official pronouncement. The Ascendancy has exercised patience. We have watched. We have waited. We have, in our generosity, permitted them to continue their small existences without interference. But the time for patience has ended. He turned to face the central projection of Earth. The hegemony requires resources. The border wars with the Outer Dark have depleted our neutronium reserves. The Kalori Syndicate has, after considerable debate, received authorization to harvest the 4th planet in this system. A new image appeared. Jupiter, massive and striped, its great red eye seemingly watching the proceedings. Not the humans themselves, Veth clarified, though his tone suggested the distinction was meaningless. Their system contains significant helium, 3 deposits, and extractable metals. We will remove what we require from the outer planets. The inner system, the third world, and its satellite, they may keep. For now, you intend to take resources from their system without their consent, said Counselor Drake of the Valorn Protectorate. It was not a question. I intend to take resources from a system that, by every law of the Ascendancy, belongs to no one of significance. Veth's wings stiffened. The humans have no standing. They have filed no claim. They have demonstrated no capacity to defend what they call their property. Under the doctrine of negligence, the Ascendancy is well within its rights to claim any unclaimed system. The doctrine of negligence applies to uncontacted species, interjected the Tessari representative. We have made contact. They know of the Ascendancy. Then let them file a formal objection. Beth's laugh was cold. Let them send a ship to Threshold. Let them stand before this council and argue their case. His compound eyes swept the chamber with performative magnanimity. I am not without compassion. I will give them one cycle, 100 of their years, to send an emissary. If they fail to do so, we will proceed with extraction. And if they succeed, asked the Valorn. If they do send an emissary? If they somehow find a way to present a convincing argument for their significance? Beth's response was a gesture that needed no translation. It was the universal sign of absolute, unshakable certainty. Then I will listen, he said, and I will explain, with great patience, why their words matter nothing. The transmission was broadcast across the entire Sol system on the anniversary of humanity's first contact with the Ascendancy, a date that had, over 3 centuries, become something of a solemn observance. Every colony, every station, every ship within range of the signal received the same images: the council chamber, the blue marble of Earth, and Veth's pronouncement. 100 years to send an emissary. 100 years to prove their worth. The message ended with a final, cutting statement. You may keep your world. Consider it a gift. We take everything else. On Earth, in the great cities that had grown to span continents, people gathered in silence to watch the replay. In New Singapore, in Nova Buenos Aires, in the undersea habitats of the Pacific Federation, in the high-altitude arcologies of the Andes, they watched and they understood. They were being told, in the most formal and humiliating terms possible, that they did not matter. That their system, everything humanity had built, everything they had struggled and died for, was simply there for the taking. The message ended. The screens went dark. And somewhere in the halls of power, in the hidden places humanity had built in the long centuries of waiting, the first spark of something ancient and terrible stood at the observation deck of Argo's station and watched the stars. The station was a lie, a beautiful, deliberate lie built into the heart of a rock the surveyors had designated 1997, XG7, a large asteroid in the main belt between Mars and Jupiter. From the outside, it appeared as nothing more than a barren chunk of carbonite and iron, too small to be worth mining, too far out to be of interest. The Kalori survey ships had passed within 100,000 kilometers of it 2 centuries ago and found nothing worth noting. They had not scanned deeply enough. They had not thought to look beneath the surface. They had not imagined that beneath the asteroid's thick crust, humanity had built a city. Argos was not the only one. There were others, hidden in the crusts of moons, tucked into the Lagrange points of gas giants, suspended in the shadow of Jupiter's massive gravity well. The Denon complex, the Hephaestus installations, the network of deep orbit stations that the human leadership called, in moments of dark humor, the backup plan. But Argos was special. Argos was the heart. The station hummed around her, the subharmonic vibration of fusion reactors, the distant clang of fabrication bays, the soft footfalls of crew moving through the corridors. 18,000 personnel lived and worked within the asteroid's crust, a population that had grown over 3 centuries from a small core of visionaries to a fully functional society that had never been seen by alien eyes. Alara was 53 years old, a young woman by the standards of her ancestors, but old enough to remember when the project had still been called Plan Babel, a desperate response to the humiliating first contact. She remembered her grandmother's stories, passed down through 4 generations. The day the transmissions had come, the day humanity learned they were not alone, the day they learned that alone was exactly what they wanted to be. Let them watch, the founders had said. Let them think us weak. Let them dismiss us. While they watch, we will build. And build they had. The original fleet had been small, a handful of ships disguised as mining vessels, hidden in the asteroid's deep caverns. But the founders had understood something the Ascendancy did not. Time was on humanity's side. A species that had gone from stone tools to nuclear fission in 10,000 years did not need to be told twice about the value of patience. 3 centuries, 30 generations. The fleet had grown. Now, Alara thought, it was time to show the galaxy what humanity had been doing in the dark. Commander. She turned. Colonel Marcus Chin stood in the doorway, his uniform crisp despite the hour, his face carrying the careful blankness of a man delivering news he did not want to deliver. Colonel. The council transmission. It's been analyzed. He stepped onto the observation deck, his boots magnetizing to the deck plating. Veth's speech. The deadline. The resource extraction authorization. And it's worse than we expected. He pulled a data slate from his coat, swiping through projections. They're not just taking Jupiter's helium-3. They're planning to strip mine the Kuiper Belt. 37 extraction facilities. They estimate the process will take 80 years and render the outer system effectively useless. Alara's jaw tightened. And our response? The Joint Chiefs have made a decision. Chen's voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, a tremor of something that might have been anticipation or might have been fear. The Council of the Hidden has authorized full deployment. Full deployment. The words hung in the air between them. How many? Alara asked, though she already knew. 1,200 vessels, Chen said. The full First Fleet, Second Fleet, and Third Fleet. All combat ready. All outfitted with the new weapons systems. He paused. All of them, Commander. 1,200 ships. The accumulated work of 3 centuries. The greatest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. Built in secret, hidden in the dark, waiting for exactly this moment. And she was to be the one to command it. When? 72 hours. The fleet will decloak at the edge of the system and proceed to Sol at maximum transit. We estimate contact with the Kalori extraction fleet within 90 days of deployment. 90 days. A little over 3 months since the moment of humiliation to the moment of reckoning. It was, Alara thought, almost poetic. Make the preparations, she said. I want all department heads in the briefing chamber in 1 hour. And Colonel? Yes, Commander. She turned back to the stars, her voice flat and cold. Find me everything there is to know about Counselor Veth. His history, his biases, his weaknesses. A pause. I want to know what makes him sleep at night. And I want to know how to take it from him. The briefing took 6 hours. Alara stood before a holographic projection of the fleet, a constellation of lights that represented 1,200 vessels, each one a marvel of human engineering, each one designed with a single purpose, to make the Ascendancy understand that they had made a terrible mistake. The Kalori Syndicate's fleet in this system numbers approximately 40 vessels, said Admiral Yuki Tanaka, pointing to a cluster of red icons near Jupiter. Their primary ships are the Sovereign-class cruisers, fast, lightly armored, designed for the sort of quick strikes the Kalori prefer. Their armament consists of plasma lance batteries and kinetic kill vehicles. They are, by our analysis, roughly equivalent to our pre-Ascendancy generation of ships. And our ships? Alara asked. Tanaka's expression shifted, pride fighting with professional restraint. Ours are not comparable. The Mjolnir-class Dreadnoughts carry a primary armament of 32 Mark IV railguns, each capable of accelerating a tungsten uranium slug to 0.3 light speed. Our Fenris-class frigates carry directed energy weapons that the Kalori have never seen. Pulsed plasma cannons that can melt through their shields in a single sustained burst. And the drones? Asked Colonel Chun. The drone swarms are the key, Tanaka confirmed. Each capital ship carries a complement of 800 autonomous combat platforms. They operate in coordinated swarms, guided by quantum-entangled AI networks that allow for reaction times measured in microseconds. Against a Kalori ship, they are overwhelming. Alara studied the holographic display. The fleet was beautiful in its cold symmetry, 100 generations of human genius compressed into lines of hull and pulses of energy. What about the Ascendancy's reinforcements? She asked. If they respond to the Kalori distress calls, they'll take 90 days to arrive from the nearest staging point, Tanaka said. We believe we can complete our objectives well before any significant reinforcement arrives. And if we're wrong? If they've been expecting something like this? Tanaka met her eyes. Then we fight anyway. The fleet was built for this, Commander. We've trained for this. We have advantages the Kalori can't even imagine. Alara nodded slowly. She turned to face the assembled officers, admirals, colonels, department heads, the cream of 3 centuries of hidden development. 300 years ago, she said, We were told we didn't matter. We've spent every day since then proving them wrong." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "The Ascendancy has looked at our world and seen weakness. They've looked at our history and seen insignificance. They think we are nothing." Her voice hardened. 3 days from now, they're going to learn that their fleet worked in efficient silence. Their ships clustered around the gas giant's moons like carrion birds circling a corpse. The sovereign flagship Unbroken Will hung in orbit above Io, its ion trails painting pale streaks against the violet haze of Jupiter's atmosphere. Commander Kethril, a junior officer by Kalori standards, but still one of the most experienced hands the Syndicate had assigned to the extraction, watched the work progress on his display. The first mining drones were descending toward the moon's sulfur-covered surface. Another team was positioning the neutronium scoops in Jupiter's upper atmosphere. The extraction was proceeding exactly as planned. Just another backwater system, Kethril thought. Just another species too weak to matter. He remembered the humans' first transmission, received 3 centuries ago, the crude electromagnetic signal that had carried their desperate pleas for contact, their naive hope that the great powers of the galaxy might acknowledge them. The Kalori intelligence analysts had listened to it, laughed at it, and filed it away as one of the many curiosities of the frontier. The humans had asked, in their primitive language, for peaceful contact and exchange of knowledge. The Syndicate had responded by ignoring them entirely. That, Kethril thought, was the appropriate response to a species that had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel. One did not negotiate with insects. One simply took what one wanted and moved on. "Commander," said his tactical officer, a Kalori female named Vethsal, "we are receiving a signal from the inner system." Kethril's compound eyes flickered with mild interest. "The humans." "Yes, it's a broadcast. Transmitted on all frequencies. They're telling us to leave." "Leave?" Kethril's wings fluttered with amusement. "They can't possibly believe. It's not a request, Commander. It's a demand. They say we have 48 hours to vacate the system or face consequences." Kethril laughed. The sound echoed through the command chamber, and several of his officers joined in. Consequences. The humans threatening consequences. It was almost cute. "Inform them that their demand is noted," he said, "and inform them that their system now belongs to the Syndicate. If they attempt to interfere with our operations, we will correct their misunderstanding." The message was sent. Kethril returned to watching the extraction. 48 hours, he thought. That was more than enough time to finish the initial setup. By the time the humans realized their warning meant nothing, the Syndicate would have already secured the first of the resource caches. He did not think about the message again until the sensors began to scream. The first indication came from the outer probe network, a series of ghost contacts, faint ripples in the sensor arrays that the Kalori technicians initially dismissed as sensor ghosts. But the contacts were not ghost. They were real. They were moving. And they were moving fast. "Commander." Vethsal's voice was higher than it should have been, a sign of stress that Kethril had never heard from her before. "Multiple contacts. Bearing 270 Mark 15. Distance, oh spirits." "How many?" Vethsal's forelimbs were trembling. 400, no, 500. "Commander, I count over 600 contacts. They're decloaking from stealth." They were already in the system. Kethril was on his feet before he realized he'd moved. "Impossible. The system is empty. We've scanned. They were hidden, Commander. Behind Jupiter. In the Lagrange points. They were waiting." The command chamber had gone silent. Every officer was staring at their displays, at the cluster of contacts that was now resolving into something that looked almost like a formation. No, not almost. It was a formation. The contacts were aligning into a series of concentric arcs, each layer closer to the Kalori fleet than the last. And they were big. Even at this distance, the sensor readings were returning signatures that made no sense. Ships that were larger than anything in the Kalori fleet. Ships that were putting out energy readings equivalent to small stars. "Give me a visual," Kethril ordered. "All channels." The main display flickered, and then it showed them. Kethril had seen many fleets in his centuries of service. He had seen the great warships of the hegemony, the elegant vessels of the Tessari, the brutal machinery of the Outer Dark Raiders. But he had never seen anything like this. The ships were dark, not the black of space, but a deeper black, a matte finish that seemed to drink in light. Their hulls were angular, aggressive, covered in what appeared to be hundreds of weapon ports and sensor arrays. There was no attempt at beauty, no effort to make them look anything other than what they were: weapons. Pure, focused, terrifying weapons. At the center of the formation, Kethril could see ships that dwarfed anything the Kalori possessed. The largest of them, massive wedges of dark metal, must have been 2 kilometers long. They were not ships. They were mobile fortresses. What are these?" Bethsal whispered. Kethril had no answer. The fleet was still approaching, still holding its formation, still moving with the kind of coordinated precision that he had only seen in the hegemony's most elite units. But these ships were moving faster. Much faster. The Kalori sensors were having trouble tracking them. Their drives were putting out signatures that the analytical software couldn't identify. And then, as if to add insult to injury, the lead elements of the fleet spoke. It was not a transmission in any conventional sense. It was a manipulation of local space-time, a compression of data into the fabric of reality itself that made the message appear simultaneously on every Kalori ship in the system. "This is Commander Alara Vance of the Human Defense Fleet. You have 48 hours remaining to leave this system. You have wasted 36 of those hours. You have 12 hours to comply. Consider this your final warning." The message repeated once and then cut. Kethril stood frozen, his compound eyes fixed on the display. The fleet continued its approach. The extraction fleet, all 40 ships of it, was frozen in place, its crews staring at the massive force that had materialized from nowhere. "Get me Veth," Kethril said, his voice barely a whisper. The Kalori fleet did not leave. Commander Kethril, under direct orders from Counselor Veth himself, held position. The extraction continued, as if the presence of 1,200 human warships meant nothing, as if the threat was an empty bluff. It was, perhaps, the greatest mistake in the history of the Kalori Syndicate. At the 14-hour mark, the human defense fleet opened fire. The first target was the Unbroken Will. Alara watched from the command deck of the Invictus, the flagship of the First Fleet, a vessel that had been named after an ancient human word for unconquered. She had chosen it deliberately. The name was a promise. "Primary batteries, fire at will," she said. The Invictus shuddered as 32 rail guns spoke in unison. The tungsten uranium slugs, each one weighing 2 tons, each one accelerated to 30% of light speed, crossed the distance to the Kalori flagship in less than a second. There was no time for the Kalori to react. There was no time for their shields to cycle up, for their point defense to engage, for their crew to reach battle stations. The slugs simply arrived, punching through the Unbroken Will's forward shields like a fist through wet paper, continuing through the hull, the decks, the reactor housing. The flagship broke in half. The explosion was visible from Earth, a flash of light that bloomed in the darkness between the gas giant and its moons. The shockwave rippled outward, catching a dozen nearby Kalori vessels and flinging them off course, their hulls scorched, their systems screaming. But the humans were not finished. "Drone launch," Alara ordered. "All decks, begin alpha pattern sweep." The Invictus and her sister Dreadnoughts disgorged their payload. 800 drones per capital ship, 1,200 ships in the fleet. Nearly 1,000,000 individual combat platforms, each one a meter-long cylinder of dark metal, each one armed with a plasma cutter and a quantum-linked AI brain. They emerged from the hangar bays in perfect formation, a cloud of death that spread across the void like a living thing. The Kalori tried to engage them, their point defense batteries lighting up the darkness with streams of anti-personnel rounds. But it was like trying to stop a flood with a paper cup. The drones simply absorbed the fire, their ablative armor shedding the energy, their AI systems adjusting in real time to target patterns. They reached the Kalori formations in seconds, and then they began to work. Plasma cutters sliced through hull plating. Quantum charges detonated in sequences that the Kalori could not predict, could not counter, could not even comprehend. The drones moved in patterns that looked almost organic, a swarm, a flock, a hive. But each individual drone was making independent calculations at speeds that the Kalori's biological brains simply could not match. The battle lasted 9 minutes. When it was over, 37 Kalori ships were debris. The remaining 3 had attempted to flee. only to be intercepted by the Fenris-class frigates that moved faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They, too, were destroyed. No Kalori survived. No Kalori escaped. The human defense fleet had announced its existence to the galaxy with a demonstration of absolute, overwhelming superiority, and not a single human vessel had taken significant damage. Alara stood on the observation deck of the Invictus, watching the debris field drift through space. Somewhere in that wreckage were the remains of Kalori who, just hours ago, had believed themselves untouchable, who had believed that humanity was beneath notice. "Commander," said Colonel Chun, stepping onto the deck. "We've received a transmission. It's from Veth." Alara didn't turn. "Put it through." The voice that emerged was not the arrogant, dismissive tone she'd heard in the council broadcast. It was something else, something that carried the faintest edge of panic. "Human Commander, this is Counselor Veth of the Kalori Syndicate. I am demanding an explanation for this unprovoked attack. The Ascendancy will not tolerate." "Counselor Veth," Alara interrupted, her voice flat. "You gave humanity 100 years to send an emissary to prove our significance. You gave us an ultimatum. You told us we were nothing." She turned to face the camera that was transmitting her image across the void. "We are not nothing. We are not insignificant. And we are not going anywhere." She paused. "I am extending a new offer. Come to the Sol System. Come to Threshold, to the Chamber of Convergence. Come and explain to humanity, face to face, why you believed you had the right to take what was ours." "Silence." "I will be waiting," Alara said. "But I will not wait long. And next time, I will not be so polite." Had always believed that the universe belonged to those with the power to take it. It was a belief that had served the Kalori Syndicate well for 6,000 years. A philosophy of strength that had elevated his species from frontier scavengers to one of the founding members of the Ascendancy. He had built his career on that belief. He had made his name by demonstrating, again and again, that the weak existed to be ruled by the strong. The Outer Dark species, the fringe colonies, the primitive species that the survey had cataloged and dismissed. And now, sitting in the Chamber of Convergence, watching the holographic display that showed the devastation of his extraction fleet, he was forced to confront a possibility he had never considered. The weak had become strong. The dismissed had become dangerous. And the humans, had just killed 370 of his people in 9 minutes. "Counselor." Veth looked up. The human was here, as requested, as demanded. She stood in the center of the chamber, her form encased in a suit of some dark material that the translation matrices could not quite categorize. She was not tall. She was not imposing, not in the way the great warriors of the hegemony were imposing. But there was something in the way she stood, something in the way she looked at him, that made Veth's forelimbs feel cold. "Commander." "Vance, was it?" "Yes." "Take a seat. We have much to discuss." The human did not sit. She simply stood there, her face hidden behind a reflective visor, her posture perfectly still. "I did not come here to discuss," she said. "I came here to deliver a message." Veth's wings flickered with irritation. "You are in the Chamber of Convergence. You will observe the protocols of—" "Your protocols," the human interrupted, "are the reason we are here. Your protocols told you that humanity was beneath notice. Your protocols told you that our system was yours for the taking. Your protocols told you that we were nothing." She stepped forward. The lights in the chamber seemed to dim around her. "Let me tell you what your protocols did not account for." Veth's compound eyes tracked her movement. Around the chamber, the other counselors were watching: Tessari, Valorn, Drake, representatives of a dozen other species who had come to witness what they expected to be a lesson in humility. He could feel their attention, their judgment. "You looked at our world," the human continued, "and you saw a species that had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel. You saw primitive weapons. You saw internal conflict. You saw a civilization that could not even manage its own planet without destroying it." She stopped. The silence was absolute. "You did not see what we were building." "What were you building?" Veth asked, and he hated how small his voice sounded. The human raised one hand. A holographic display appeared in the air between them. Images of ships, stations, installations that the Kalori surveys had never seen. Veth stared at them, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Hidden installations, deep orbit platforms, a fleet, that had been constructed in secret over 3 centuries while the Ascendancy watched Earth and saw nothing. You watched our cities, the humans said. You watched our conflicts. You watched our failures. And you concluded, based on what you saw, that we were weak. She reached out, and the holographic display expanded, showing the specifications of the ships, the weapons, the systems that humanity had built in the dark. You did not consider that we might be showing you exactly what we wanted you to see. You did not consider that our failures might be deliberate. You did not consider that while you were watching the surface, we were building beneath it. Veth's wings had stopped moving. His entire body was frozen. Your fleet was built to fight the outer dark, the human said. Your weapons were designed to defeat species that had similar technology to your own. You had never seen anything like ours. You had never imagined anything like ours. She stepped closer. Her visor reflected his image, distorted, fragmented, small. You gave us 100 years to prove our significance. You gave us an ultimatum. You told us we were nothing. Her voice dropped to a whisper, a sound that somehow carried through the silence of the chamber like a blade. You were the ones who taught us that the only way to be significant is to make ourselves undeniable. You were the ones who taught us that the only way to be safe is to be unassailable. You were the ones who taught us that the galaxy respects nothing but strength. She paused. And now we have strength. More than you. More than the hegemony. More than anyone. Veth tried to speak. His vocal membranes failed him. He tried to move. His limbs refused. The question now, the human continued, is not whether we are significant. The question is what you are going to do about it. She turned to face the assembled council, representatives of 11 species, each one watching with expressions that ranged from shock to horror to something that might have been respect. Humankind does not seek war, she said, her voice ringing through the chamber. We have never sought war. We built this fleet not to conquer, but to survive. We revealed it not to dominate, but to defend. She looked back at Veth. But if the Ascendancy chooses to view our existence as a threat, if the Syndicate chooses to pursue this conflict, then let them know what awaits them. Let them know that the humans who were once dismissed as nothing will make them understand that they were wrong. She moved toward the exit. The chamber's door slid open for her. One more thing, counselor. She stopped at the threshold, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. You asked what we were. Let me tell you. She turned. The visor reflected the lights of the chamber, hiding her eyes, hiding her expression. We are humanity. We are the species that you thought was weak. We are the species that you thought was nothing. A pause. And now you know better. She walked out. The doors closed behind her, and the chamber of convergence remained silent. The counselors, the representatives, the witnesses to the most significant moment in the history of the Ascendancy, frozen in place, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Alara stood on the observation deck of the Invictus, watching the stars slide past as the fleet transitioned through fold space. The battle was over. The message had been delivered. The Ascendancy knew, now, that humanity was not what they had believed. But there was no triumph in her heart, no joy in the victory. She thought of the Kalori who had died, the ones who had believed so completely in their own superiority that they had never imagined they could be destroyed. She thought of Veth's face, the way his compound eyes had tracked her movement, the way his voice had failed him at the crucial moment. They had not expected this. None of them had. And that, Alara thought, was the most tragic part of all. Commander. She turned. Admiral Tanaka stood in the doorway, her uniform crisp, her expression careful. We've received a transmission from Threshold. The Ascendancy is calling an emergency session. They're debating their response. And they're divided. Tanaka stepped onto the observation deck. Some want to declare war, to mobilize the full hegemonic fleet and destroy us before we can grow stronger. Others want to negotiate. They believe we can be integrated. Integrated. Alara's voice was flat. Like the other species they've integrated. Subjugated, you mean? Perhaps. But there's something else. Tanaka hesitated. Counselor Veth has requested a private audience with you. He says he has information. Something he believes you need to know. Alara studied the stars for a long moment. Then she nodded. The meeting took place on a station in neutral space, a small installation orbiting a brown dwarf in the system called Kelshar. Veth arrived with a guard of honor, 6 Kalori warriors who stood at attention as their counselor approached the human commander. They were alone, finally, in a small chamber with transparent walls that looked out on the stars. "You wanted to speak with me," Alara said. "Speak." Veth's compound eyes moved to the window, to the distant points of light that marked the galaxy's edge. "When the hegemony first discovered your world," he said, "I was part of the survey team. I was young then, a junior analyst, assigned to categorize the species for the archive." He paused. "I remember looking at your world and thinking, this is a species that will never amount to anything. Your technology was primitive. Your biology was fragile. Your history was nothing but war and suffering and failure. I saw a species that was still struggling with the most basic concepts of civilization, and I dismissed you." His wings fluttered, a gesture that might have been resignation. "I was wrong." Alara said nothing. "I was wrong," Veth repeated, "because I was looking at the wrong things. I was looking at your surface, the things you showed the galaxy, the failures you allowed us to see. I was not looking at what you were building beneath." He turned to face her. "You said we taught you that the only way to be significant is to make yourselves undeniable. You were right, but you also taught me something. You taught me to look deeper, to see beyond the surface." He paused. "In the archives, there is a record that only the highest-ranking counselors know about. It speaks of a species that existed before the Ascendancy, a species that rose to dominance across the entire galaxy, that built wonders and horrors, that spread across 1,000 systems before vanishing." Alara's eyes narrowed. "Vanishing? We don't know what happened to them. The records are incomplete, but we know that they were ancient, older than the Kalori, older than the Tessari, older than any species currently in the Ascendancy. They left relics behind, artifacts, echoes of their power." He reached into his robes and pulled out a small object, a fragment of something that glinted with inner light. "This was found on a world at the edge of the known galaxy. It is made of a material we cannot identify, and it carries a symbol." He held it out. Alara took it. The fragment was warm to the touch. The symbol etched into its surface was simple, a circle with a line through it, a shape that looked almost like a letter, almost like a rune. She recognized it. It was a letter from an ancient human alphabet, the letter that, in some languages, represented the word N. "This is what you are, isn't it?" Veth whispered. "You are not what you appear to be. You are not the primitive species we dismissed. You are something else, something old, something that has been waiting." Alara looked at the fragment in her hand. She looked at the symbol, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of history, the weight of all the years, all the hidden knowledge, all the things her ancestors had built in the dark. "We are what we have always been," she said finally. "We are human. We are the species that learns, the species that adapts, the species that survives." She handed the fragment back. "You were right about one thing, Counselor. We are not what we appear to be. We are more. And now you know that." She turned to leave. "Wait," Veth said. "What happens now? What happens to the Ascendancy? To the galaxy?" Alara paused at the door. 300 years ago, you looked at us and saw nothing. You looked at our world and decided we were beneath notice. You decided we were not significant." She turned, her voice hardening. "Now we are significant. Now we are undeniable. The galaxy will have to decide how to respond to that. Will they accept us? Will they fear us? Will they try to destroy us?" She shrugged. "We did not ask for this. We did not want this. But we are ready for it. We have always been ready." She opened the door. "Tell your council what you know. Tell them everything. Let them decide what kind of galaxy they want to live in." She stepped through. "Because we're not going anywhere." The fleet returned to Sol in triumph, but the celebration was muted. Alara stood on the observation deck of the Invictus as Earth grew in the view screen. A blue marble wrapped in white, fragile and beautiful, the home that humanity had protected for so long. She thought about the fragment, about the symbol, about the secrets that her ancestors had kept, the legacy they had built in the dark. She thought about the future, the uncertain, dangerous, terrifying future that stretched ahead of them. The Ascendancy knew now. The galaxy knew. Humanity was no longer a secret, no longer hidden, no longer dismissed. They were a power. They were a threat. They were significant. And the rest of the galaxy would have to learn to live with that. "Commander," said Colonel Chun, stepping onto the deck. "The Joint Chiefs are requesting a full briefing. They want to know everything. About the battle, about the council, about the meeting with Veth." Alara nodded. Tell them I'll be there in 1 hour. Shin hesitated. Commander, what do we do now? Where do we go from here? Alara looked at Earth, at the world that had been dismissed, ignored for 3 centuries, at the world that had built a fleet in secret and waited for exactly this moment. We do what we've always done, she said. We survive. We adapt. We grow. She turned to face him, and there was something in her eyes, a light that might have been hope, might have been determination, might have been something older. And this time, we do it in the open. The stars burned cold and distant, as they always had. But for humanity, everything had changed. They were no longer the species that had been dismissed as nothing. They were no longer the species that had been told they did not matter. They were the fleet in the dark, the hidden blade, the secret that had waited 300 years to be revealed. And the galaxy would never look at them the same way again.